The blood-red sunset painted the western horizon as Olivia Thornton clutched her mother's golden locket, the only possession she had left after the stagecoach robbery that had left her alone, penniless, and running for her life in the unforgiving Wyoming territory of 1876. The distant howl of wolves echoed through the darkening pine forest as Olivia stumbled forward, her torn dress catching on brambles and her once fine leather boots now worn through at the soles. 3 days without proper food or water had taken their toll. The bullet graze on her arm throbbed mercilessly, a constant reminder of how close she'd come to death when the Blackwell gang had attacked the stagecoach. "Just a little further," she whispered to herself, her parched lips cracking with each word. The map she'd been given in Laramie suggested a settlement lay just beyond the ridge ahead. If she could make it there by morning, perhaps she could find help, find safety. The world began to tilt and sway before her eyes. Olivia reached out to steady herself against a tree trunk, her fingers scraping against rough bark. The sound of running water reached her ears, tantalizingly close. "Water," she gasped, pushing herself forward with renewed determination. Breaking through a thicket of brush, she found herself at the edge of a clear, rushing stream that cut through the forest floor like a silver ribbon in the fading light. Olivia fell to her knees and plunged her hands into the cool water, bringing it desperately to her lips. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. She drank deeply, then splashed the cold water over her face, washing away days of dust and fear. But as she attempted to stand again, the forest began to spin around her. Black spots danced before her eyes as exhaustion, hunger, and the lingering effects of her wound finally claimed their due. The last thing she remembered was the soft, mossy ground rising up to meet her as darkness claimed her consciousness. Miles away, Xavier "Hawk" Hawkins urged his dun stallion Samson up the winding forest trail. At 32, Hawk had spent more than half his life in the saddle, first as an Army scout, then as a tracker, and now as a ranch hand for the Rockingham spread just east of Prosperity Junction. His weathered face, tanned from years under the western sun, bore the lines of a man who'd seen too much too young, but his hazel eyes remained sharp and alert. "Come on, boy," he urged his horse as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Let's make it to the stream before full dark." Hawk was returning from a solo mission tracking down a mountain lion that had been preying on the rocking Mtkes calves. 3 days of tracking had finally led to success, and now he was eager to return to the bunkhouse and the relative comfort of his narrow cot. The stream came into view just as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. Hawk dismounted, letting Samson drink deeply from the clear water. He stretched his tall frame, working out the kinks from a long day in the saddle, and reached for his canteen. That's when he saw her. At first he thought it was just a bundle of rags caught against the rocks at the stream's edge. But as he approached, the fading light revealed the unmistakable form of a woman, face down and motionless at the water's edge. "Madam," he called out, approaching cautiously. When she didn't respond, he knelt beside her and gently turned her over. Even in the dim light, he could see she was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with delicate features now pale from exhaustion. Her honey-blonde hair was tangled with twigs and leaves, and her once fine dress was torn and mudded. A makeshift bandage, now soaked through, was wrapped around her left arm. Hawk pressed his fingers to her neck and felt a pulse weak, but steady. Relief washed over him. She was alive, but barely. "Miss, can you hear me?" he asked, but received no response. He looked around, assessing the situation. Night was falling fast, and the nearest town was at least a day's ride away. The woman needed shelter, warmth, and care, and she needed it now. With practiced efficiency, Hawk removed his bedroll from Samson's saddle and spread it on a flat patch of ground away from the stream. He gathered wood for a fire, working quickly in the fading light. Once he had a small blaze going, he returned to the unconscious woman. "Sorry about this, miss," he murmured as he carefully lifted her in his arms. She was lighter than he expected, concerningly so. He carried her to the fire and laid her gently on his bedroll, covering her with his spare blanket. In the flickering firelight, he could better assess her condition. The wound on her arm wasn't deep, but it was inflamed a bullet graze if he had to guess. Her clothes were damp from the stream and her skin felt cool to the touch. Exposure and dehydration, compounded by the wound, had likely led to her collapse. Hawk retrieved his medical kit from his saddlebags, a necessity for a man who often spent weeks alone in the wilderness. He cleaned and redressed her wound with a mixture of whiskey and yarrow paste, an old remedy he'd learned from a Shoshone medicine woman years before. Next, he brewed a strong tea of willow bark and herbs over the fire. When it was ready, he gently lifted the woman's head and managed to get a few sips past her lips. She stirred slightly but didn't wake. "That's it," he encouraged, though he doubted she could hear him. "Just a little more." As the night deepened around them, Hawk settled in to keep watch. He added wood to the fire, keeping it burning bright to ward off the chill and any curious predators. Samson grazed nearby, occasionally nickering softly in the darkness. Hawk studied the unconscious woman's face in the firelight. Despite the dirt and exhaustion, there was a quiet dignity in her features. What was she doing out here alone, running from something or someone? The quality of her clothing, even torn and mudded, suggested she wasn't a common traveler. "Who are you?" he wondered aloud, but the woman gave no answer, her breathing shallow but steady under the blanket. As the moon rose high over the Wyoming wilderness, Hawk continued his vigil, determined to see this mysterious woman through the night. Little did he know that his chance encounter at the stream's edge would change the course of both their lives forever. Olivia drifted in and out of consciousness, caught between fevered dreams and fragmented reality. Sometimes she thought she felt strong hands adjusting the blanket around her, or holding a cup to her lips. Other times, she was back on the stagecoach, reliving the terrifying moments of the attack, the shots, the screams, the brutal faces of the Blackwell gang as they dragged passengers out one by one. When she finally opened her eyes fully, the first light of dawn was filtering through the pine branches overhead. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there. Then the memories came flooding back: the escape, the desperate journey through the wilderness, finding the stream. She became aware of the crackling fire beside her and the unfamiliar bedroll beneath her. Someone had found her, cared for her. Her arm was freshly bandaged, and though her body ached with exhaustion, the feverish heat had subsided. Turning her head slowly, Olivia saw him, a tall man crouched by the fire, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the morning light. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy: worn denim, a faded cotton shirt, and scuffed leather boots. A battered Stetson rested on the ground beside him as he stirred something in a small pot over the flames. Fear shot through her momentarily. Who was this stranger, and what did he want with her? Her recent experiences had taught her hard lessons about trusting others. As if sensing her gaze, the man turned, revealing a weathered face with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of beard. His eyes, a striking hazel color, widened slightly when he saw she was awake. "Well, good morning," he said, his voice deep but gentle, like distant thunder on a summer day. "Wasn't sure you'd be joining the land of the living anytime soon." Olivia tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. She managed only a raspy cough. The man immediately reached for a canteen, moved to her side and carefully helped her into a sitting position. His hands were calloused but surprisingly gentle as he supported her back. "Easy now," he said, offering the canteen. "Small sips." The water was cool and sweet, bringing immediate relief to her parched throat. After a few sips, Olivia found her voice. "Thank you," she managed, her voice still weak. "Where am I? Who are you?" "Name's Xavier Hawkins, though most folks just call me Hawk," he replied, settling back on his heels. "You're about 20 miles east of Prosperity Junction. Found you passed out by the stream last night. You've been out cold ever since." Olivia's hand went instinctively to her neck, relief washing over her when she felt her mother's locket still there. "I'm Olivia." "Olivia Thornton," she said, deciding honesty was the best approach. "I was on the stagecoach to Laramie when we were attacked by bandits. The Blackwell gang." Hawk's expression darkened. "The Blackwells are bad business. Been terrorizing this territory for months now. You're lucky to be alive." "Not everyone was," Olivia said quietly, the faces of her fellow passengers flashing before her eyes. "I managed to escape during the confusion. They've been tracking me ever since." Hawk nodded grimly. "That explains the bullet graze. How long you been on the run?" 3 days, I think." The days started to blur together. Hawk stood and returned to the fire, stirring the contents of the pot. "Well, you're safe for now. No one's going to find us here." He dipped a tin cup into the pot and brought it back to her. "It's just prairie porridge, oats and dried berries, but it'll put some strength back in you." Olivia accepted the cup gratefully, the warm food awakening her hunger. As she ate, she studied her rescuer more carefully. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to the wilderness, every action deliberate and efficient. There was something reassuring about his presence, a solid dependability that she instinctively trusted despite her recent caution. "Where were you headed?" Hawk asked, preparing a cup of the porridge for himself. Olivia hesitated. Her journey had been born of desperation, with no clear destination in mind except away. Admitting that seemed foolish now. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted finally. "I was hoping to reach the next town, find work perhaps. I have an aunt in San Francisco, but that's too far to consider right now." Hawk nodded, not pressing for more details. "Prosperity Junction's your best bet then. Small place, but decent folks for the most part." "I work at a ranch nearby the Rockingham." "Are you a cowboy then?" Olivia asked, finding comfort in the ordinary conversation. A small smile crossed Hawk's face, softening his rugged features. "Among other things. Done a bit of everything out here, Army scout, tracker, ranch hand. Jack of all trades, master of none, as they say." Olivia attempted to stand, wanting to test her strength, but a wave of dizziness overtook her and she swayed precariously. In an instant, Hawk was beside her, his strong arm supporting her. "Whoa there," he cautioned. "You're not ready to be up and about just yet. That wound and the exposure took more out of you than you realize." Reluctantly, Olivia allowed him to help her back down. "I can't just stay here," she protested. "The Blackwells aren't going to find you," Hawk finished firmly. "And you're in no condition to travel. Another day of rest, and then we'll head to Prosperity Junction together." The way he said it, not as a question, but as a simple statement of fact, should have bothered Olivia. She'd had enough of men making decisions for her. But there was no possessiveness in Hawk's tone, only practical concern, and she found herself nodding in agreement. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. Most men would have ridden on, or worse." Something flickered in Hawk's eyes, a shadow of old pain quickly masked. "I'm not most men," he said simply, then turned away to tend to his horse. As the morning progressed, Olivia rested while Hawk moved efficiently around the camp, checking his horse, replenishing the firewood, and scouting the surrounding area. She watched him covertly, wondering about the story behind the quiet cowboy who had saved her life. Little did she know that their journey together was just beginning, and that the path ahead would test them both in ways neither could imagine. As midday approached, the sun climbed higher in the clear Wyoming sky, warming the small clearing by the stream. Hawk had helped Olivia move to a sunny spot where she could sit with her back against a smooth boulder, wrapped in his spare blanket despite the growing warmth of the day. "The fever's not completely gone," he explained when she protested the blanket. "Best to keep warm until it passes." Olivia didn't argue. Though she hated feeling helpless, she recognized the wisdom in his words. Besides, there was something oddly comforting about being cared for after days of desperate solitude. "May I ask you something, Mr. Hawkins?" she ventured as he knelt by the stream, filling his canteen. "Hawk," he corrected, glancing over his shoulder. "And yes, you may." "How did you learn to treat wounds like this?" She gestured to her bandaged arm. "You seem to know what you're doing." Hawk returned to the fire, setting the canteen down before answering. "Necessity, mostly. When you spend enough time in places where doctors are scarce, you learn to patch yourself up." He paused, then added, "Served as a field medic's assistant during the war for a spell, too. Saw more than my share of bullet wounds then." "The war?" Olivia asked softly, realizing he meant the civil war that had torn the nation apart just over a decade ago. Hawk nodded, his expression growing distant. "Joined up in '63 when I was barely 18. Served until Appomattox." He didn't elaborate further, and something in his expression told Olivia not to press for more details. Instead, she shared a bit of her own story. "I was a child during the war. My father owned a shipping business in Boston. He didn't survive the conflict." "I'm sorry to hear that," Hawk said, genuine sympathy in his voice. "My mother tried to keep the business going afterward, but it was difficult for a woman alone." Olivia stared into the flames, memories washing over her. "She remarried 5 years ago, a business associate of my father's. We both thought it would provide security." Hawk remained silent, allowing her to continue at her own pace. "After she died last winter, I discovered my stepfather had been embezzling from the company for years. When I confronted him—" She trailed off, her hand unconsciously touching her cheek where the bruise had long since faded. "Let's just say I learned it wasn't the first time he'd raised his hand to a woman." Hawk's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. "So you ran west?" Olivia nodded. "With what little money I could gather. I thought I could disappear, start fresh somewhere no one knew me. Then the stagecoach robbery happened, and I lost everything except this." She touched the locket at her throat. "It was my mother's." They fell into companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. After a while, Hawk rose and checked on his horse, a magnificent dun stallion that grazed contentedly nearby. "He's beautiful," Olivia commented, glad for a change of subject. A genuine smile crossed Hawk's face. "That's Samson. Been with me for 7 years now, best horse I've ever had. You two seem to understand each other." "We've seen some miles together," Hawk agreed, patting the horse's neck affectionately. "In this country, a good horse is better than gold." As the afternoon wore on, Hawk taught Olivia about the various plants growing around their campsite, which ones could be eaten, which had medicinal properties, and which to avoid. His knowledge of the land was impressive, and Olivia found herself hanging on his every word, storing the information away. "You'd have made a good teacher," she observed after he explained how to use yarrow to stop bleeding. Hawk looked surprised, then thoughtful. "Never considered that. Always figured this life was all I was meant for." "And what life is that?" He gestured vaguely at the wilderness around them. "This. The open country, moving on when the mood strikes, answering to no one but myself and the seasons. It sounds lonely, Olivia said softly, then immediately regretted her words. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. No need to apologize for speaking the truth, Hawk interrupted, his voice without rancor. It is lonely sometimes, but it's a life I chose, or maybe it chose me. He looked at her curiously. What about you? What life were you hoping to find out here? Olivia considered the question seriously. Safety at first, freedom from my stepfather's control, but beyond that. She paused, struggling to articulate feelings she'd barely acknowledged to herself. I suppose I wanted a chance to discover who I could be when I wasn't defined by someone else's expectations. In Boston, I was always someone's daughter or someone's stepdaughter or a potential wife for someone's son. Never just me. Hawk nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. The West is good for that. Out here, a person can remake themselves. Your past matters less than what you can do and who you choose to be now. Is that what you did? Olivia asked. Remake yourself, a shadow crossed Hawk's face. In a manner of speaking, he stood abruptly. I should check our perimeter again before evening sets in. Olivia watched him walk away, aware that she'd touched on something painful. This quiet cowboy who had saved her life clearly carried his own burdens, his own secrets. She found herself wanting to know more, not out of idle curiosity, but from a genuine desire to understand the man behind the weathered exterior. As the shadows lengthened across the clearing, Olivia realized with some surprise that despite her precarious situation, she felt safer than she had in months, perhaps years. There was something about Xavier Hawkins that inspired trust, a solid dependability that transcended their short acquaintance. What she didn't yet recognize was the subtle shift in her heart, the first stirrings of a feeling that would soon grow beyond simple gratitude. By evening, Olivia's strength had improved enough that she could move around the camp a little, though Hawk insisted she not overexert herself. He'd fashioned a simple broth from dried beef and wild onions, and the nourishing meal further revived her spirits. As they sat by the fire after eating, the night sounds of the forest creating a peaceful backdrop, Olivia decided to satisfy her curiosity about their destination. Tell me about Prosperity Junction, she requested. What kind of place is it? Hawk leaned back against his saddle, stretching his long legs toward the fire. Started as a mining camp about 15 years ago. Silver strike that played out faster than folks hoped. But by then, the town had taken root. It's small, maybe 300 souls all told. Got the usual general store, livery, a couple saloons, a small hotel. Miss Adelaide runs a boarding house for respectable ladies. And the people, decent enough, most of them. Sheriff Willard keeps order pretty well. Not much trouble except when the cattle drives come through or when miners from the northern camps come down to blow their earnings. He paused, considering. It's not Boston, that's for certain, but there's opportunity there for those willing to work. What kind of work could a woman find? Olivia asked practically. Teaching, maybe. The town's looking to hire a proper school teacher, or the hotel's always needing help. Some women take in laundry or sewing. He glanced at her hands, which despite the days in the wilderness still showed the delicate care of someone unaccustomed to manual labor. What skills do you have? Olivia laughed softly, without humor. I can play the pianoforte, embroider a handkerchief, recite French poetry, and keep accounts. My father insisted I learn that much of the business. Not exactly useful frontier accomplishments. The accounts might be, Hawk countered. Most businesses out here are run by folks with more ambition than education. A woman who can manage figures would be valuable. His matter-of-fact assessment gave Olivia a small surge of hope. Perhaps she wasn't as ill-equipped for this new life as she feared. How far is the ranch where you work? she asked, changing the subject. The Rockingham. About half a day's ride east of town. Been working there going on 3 years now. Is it a large operation? Hawk nodded. 5,000 head of cattle, give or take. Morgan McAllister runs it, tough but fair man. His wife Elizabeth is a fine lady, came out from Philadelphia to teach and ended up marrying the biggest rancher in the territory. He smiled slightly. Caused quite a stir at the time. They sound interesting, Olivia said, trying to picture the couple. They are. They've built something good together. There was a hint of wistfulness in Hawk's tone that caught Olivia's attention. Have you ever thought of settling down? She asked before she could stop herself. Building something of your own. Hawk's expression grew guarded. Thought about it. Even tried it once. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the night sky. Didn't work out. The finality in his tone made it clear he didn't wish to elaborate, and Olivia respected his privacy. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the crackling fire and the occasional hoot of an owl. I should thank you properly, Olivia said finally, for saving my life. Not many would have stopped for a stranger. Hawk shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. Did what anyone would do. No, Olivia shook her head firmly. Not anyone, not in my experience. She met his eyes across the fire. You're a good man, Xavier Hawkins. Something flickered in his gaze, uncertainty, perhaps, or disbelief. You don't know me well enough to make that judgment, Miss Thornton. I know enough, she replied simply. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, and Olivia felt a curious flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her weakened condition. Hawk was the first to look away, rising to add more wood to the fire. You should rest, he said, his voice gruffer than before. We'll head out at first light if you're feeling strong enough. I'd like to reach town before dark tomorrow. Olivia nodded, suddenly aware of her exhaustion. As she settled back onto the bedroll, she watched Hawk move around the camp with that same efficient grace, securing their perimeter for the night. Before sleep claimed her, a troubling thought surfaced. Tomorrow they would reach Prosperity Junction, and then what? Their paths would naturally diverge, he to his ranch, she to whatever uncertain future awaited her. She was surprised by how much the thought of parting ways unsettled her. In just 2 days, this quiet, steadfast cowboy had become her anchor in a world turned upside down. The idea of facing that world without him nearby left her feeling adrift. As sleep finally overtook her, Olivia's last conscious thought was a wish that their journey together might somehow be prolonged, a wish that, unknown to her, would soon be granted in unexpected ways. Morning broke crisp and clear, with the promise of heat to come as the sun rose higher. Hawk was already up and moving about the camp when Olivia awakened, feeling stronger than she had in days. The fever had broken during the night, and though her arm still ached, the angry redness around the wound had subsided. Morning, Hawk greeted her, handing over a tin cup of strong coffee. How are you feeling? Much better, Olivia replied truthfully, accepting the cup with gratitude. The rich aroma alone seemed to infuse her with energy. I think I'm ready to travel. Hawk studied her face carefully, assessing her condition with those observant eyes. We'll take it slow, he decided. It's about a 6-hour ride to town, but we can stop if needed. Only then did the implication of his words register with Olivia. I'll be riding with you, on your horse. A hint of amusement touched Hawk's features. Unless you've got a horse hidden in those skirts, yes. Samson's strong enough to carry us both for 1 day's journey. Olivia hadn't considered the logistics of their travel. The thought of riding behind Hawk, necessarily close to him, brought a flush to her cheeks that had nothing to do with her recent fever. I wouldn't want to burden your horse, she began, but Hawk waved away her concern. Samson won't mind the extra weight, especially since you're hardly more substantial than a spring calf. His tone softened. Unless you'd rather stay here another day or two. Your choice, Miss Thornton. The way he deferred to her decision, treating her as an equal partner rather than someone to be managed, reinforced Olivia's growing respect for him. "No, I'm ready to go," she said with more confidence than she felt. "And please call me Olivia. After saving my life, I think we can dispense with formalities." Hawk nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "Olivia, then." They broke camp efficiently, Hawk teaching her how to erase the signs of their presence a necessary precaution. He explained, in case the Blackwell gang was still searching for her. He helped her wash in the stream, tactfully turning his back to give her privacy while staying close enough to assist if needed. When it came time to mount Samson, Hawk demonstrated unexpected sensitivity to her modesty. He fashioned a makeshift riding skirt by adjusting her torn dress, then linked his hands to form a step for her foot. "Up you go," he said, boosting her effortlessly onto the horse's back. Samson stood patiently, barely shifting his weight despite the unfamiliar rider. Hawk swung up behind her with practiced ease, his chest a solid presence at her back. Olivia stiffened involuntarily at the unfamiliar proximity. "Relax," Hawk advised quietly, his breath warm against her ear. "Samson can sense tension. Just breathe and move with him." Olivia nodded, trying to loosen her rigid posture. As they set off at a walk, she gradually adjusted to the rhythm of the horse's movement and the secure feeling of Hawk's arms on either side of her as he held the reins. The day warmed quickly as they traveled, the terrain gradually changing from dense forest to more open country, dotted with stands of aspen and pine. Hawk pointed out landmarks and wildlife as they rode, naming the distant mountain ranges and explaining the habits of the pronghorn antelope that bounded away at their approach. "How did you learn so much about this land?" Olivia asked during one of their brief rest stops. Hawk shrugged, helping her down from Samson. "Observation, mostly, and listening to those who were here before. The Shoshone and Crow know this country better than any white man ever will." "You speak as if you respect them," Olivia noted, surprised. In Boston, conversations about the Western tribes were usually colored by fear or contempt. "I do," Hawk said simply. "A man would be a fool not to respect those who have survived in this land for generations." He handed her the canteen. "I lived among the Shoshone for almost a year after the war. Learned more in that time than in all the years before or since." This revelation intrigued Olivia, opening another window into Hawk's mysterious past. "They accepted you." "Not at first," he admitted, his gaze distant with memory. "But I had skills they valued, could repair firearms, new army movements. Eventually, they decided I was worth keeping around." A fleeting smile crossed his face. "Old Broken Knife said I was too stubborn to be fully white, must have some Indian blood somewhere." Olivia found herself captivated by this glimpse into his life. Each new piece of information revealed a man of surprising depth and complexity, far from the simple cowboy she might have initially assumed him to be. As they resumed their journey, Olivia became increasingly aware of Hawk's physical presence behind her. The solid strength of his chest against her back, the careful way his arms encircled but never confined her, the clean scent of him leather, pine, and something uniquely his own all combined to create a disconcerting awareness that she tried to ignore. They stopped at midday by a small creek to rest Samson and eat a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. Hawk insisted on checking Olivia's wound, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle as he changed the bandage. "Healing clean," he pronounced with satisfaction. No infection. Thanks to your care, Olivia said, watching his face as he concentrated on his task. In the clear midday light, she noticed for the first time a thin scar that ran along his jaw, disappearing into his beard. Without thinking, she reached up to touch it. Hawk went perfectly still at her touch, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Sorry," she murmured, withdrawing her hand quickly. "I didn't mean to, it's all right," he said, his voice rougher than usual. He cleared his throat and finished securing the bandage. "Souvenir from a Comanche lance. Long time ago." The moment passed, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of awareness that neither was ready to name. As the afternoon progressed, the landscape began to show signs of settlement, fenced pastures, the occasional distant farmhouse, a rutted wagon road that they followed east. Olivia felt a curious mixture of anticipation and reluctance as they drew closer to civilization. She was eager to reach safety, yet each mile brought them nearer to the moment when she and Hawk would part ways. "Tell me more about this boarding house," she said, breaking a companionable silence. "The one run by Miss Adelaide Finch," Hawk elaborated. "Came west as a Harvey girl, saved her money and opened the place about 7 years ago. Strict but fair. No men allowed past the parlor, and she enforces an 8 o'clock curfew. But the rooms are clean, the food's good, and her reputation spotless." "It sounds perfect," Olivia said, trying to inject enthusiasm into her voice. "Do you think she'll have a vacancy?" "Usually does. Town's not growing as fast as folks hoped." He paused, then added, "The McAllisters might be able to help you find work. Mrs. McAllister takes an interest in newcomers, especially women on their own." His consideration touched her. "Thank you. I appreciate any help I can get." They rode in silence for a while longer, each lost in their own thoughts. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when Hawk reined Samson to a halt at the top of a low rise. "There it is," he said, pointing ahead. "Prosperity Junction." Olivia followed his gesture and saw the town sprawled across a valley below them, a collection of wooden buildings flanking a wide main street, with smaller structures scattered outward. It wasn't large by Eastern standards, but after days in the wilderness, it looked like a metropolis to her eyes. "It's bigger than I expected," she admitted. "Looks can be deceiving," Hawk said with a hint of amusement. "Half those buildings are empty, waiting for a boom that never quite arrived, but it serves its purpose." As they descended toward the town, Olivia felt a growing nervousness. What awaited her there? Could she truly build a new life from nothing? And why did the thought of saying goodbye to this man she barely knew fill her with such inexplicable sadness? "Hawk," she said impulsively, turning slightly to see his face. "I don't know how to thank you properly." "For everything." His expression softened, those hazel eyes warming as they met hers. "No thanks needed. Anyone would have done the same." "No," she shook her head firmly. "Not anyone. Not like you did." Something unspoken passed between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, that their brief journey together had affected them both in ways neither had anticipated. Then Hawk straightened in the saddle, his expression becoming more guarded as they approached the outskirts of town. "Better pull your bonnet lower," he advised practically. "Until we know for certain the Blackwells aren't around, best to keep a low profile." Olivia nodded and adjusted her battered bonnet, though she doubted anyone would recognize the refined Boston lady she'd once been in her current bedraggled state. As they rode down the main street of Prosperity Junction, she took in the sights with keen interest: the general store with its covered porch, the Silver Dollar saloon with batwing doors, the small white church at the far end of town. People stopped to stare as they passed, curious about the cowboy riding double with a woman. Hawk nodded politely to those he knew but didn't slow Sampson's steady pace until they reached a two-story clapboard house set back from the street. Its neat picket fence and well-tended garden speaking of care and respectability. "Miss Adelaide's," Hawk explained, dismounting before helping Olivia down. Her legs felt wobbly after the long ride, and she steadied herself against his solid frame for a moment longer than strictly necessary. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a tall, angular woman with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Despite her forbidding appearance, her eyes were kind as they assessed the pair approaching her gate. "Xavier Hawkins," she called out, her voice carrying the refined accent of the East. "What trouble have you brought to my doorstep this time?" "No trouble, Miss Adelaide," Hawk replied with easy respect. "Just a lady in need of lodging. Miss Olivia Thornton recently arrived from Boston." Miss Adelaide's shrewd eyes took in Olivia's disheveled appearance, the bandaged arm, and the way she stood perhaps a bit too close to Hawk. But there was no judgment in her gaze, only practical assessment. "Well, come in then," she said, holding the door wider. "You look like you could use a hot bath and a proper meal." As they stepped through the gate, Olivia felt Hawk hesitate beside her. This was at the moment of parting. She turned to him, suddenly at a loss for words. "I should get going," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Got to report back to the ranch." "Of course," Olivia managed, fighting an irrational urge to ask him to stay. "Thank you again for everything." Hawk nodded, his expression unreadable. "Miss Adelaide will take good care of you." He touched the brim of his hat in a respectful gesture. "Good luck to you, Olivia Thornton." "And to you, Xavier Hawkins," she replied softly. He turned to go, but Miss Adelaide's voice stopped him. "Now hold on just a minute, young man. You're not riding off without explaining how this young lady came to be in your company with a bullet wound and looking like she's been dragged through half of Wyoming." Hawk sighed, recognizing the futility of arguing with the formidable boarding house proprietress. "It's a long story, madam." "Then you'd better come inside and tell it," Miss Adelaide said firmly. "I've got coffee on the stove and stew in the pot." With a resigned nod, Hawk followed the women into the house, unaware that fate had just granted Olivia's unspoken wish for their paths to remain entwined a little longer. The interior of Miss Adelaide's boarding house was a revelation to Olivia. After days in the wilderness, the simple comforts of civilization seemed almost overwhelming. Polished wooden floors covered with colorful rag rugs, walls adorned with framed needlework samplers, and actual furniture that didn't consist of rocks or fallen logs. Miss Adelaide led them into a cozy parlor, gesturing for them to sit while she disappeared to fetch the promised coffee. Hawk remained standing, hat in hand, looking distinctly uncomfortable in these domestic surroundings. "You can sit," Olivia said gently, settling onto a horsehair sofa. Hawk shook his head. "Better not. Trail dust." He glanced down at his dirt-encrusted clothes with a rueful expression. Before Olivia could respond, Miss Adelaide returned with a tray bearing a coffee pot, cups, and a plate of biscuits. She set it on a small table and fixed Hawk with a penetrating stare. "Now then, Mr. Hawkins, I'm waiting for an explanation." With reluctance, Hawk recounted the events of the past 2 days, finding Olivia unconscious by the stream, learning of her escape from the Blackwell gang, and their journey to town. He was economical with details, presenting only the essential facts without embellishment. Miss Adelaide listened attentively, her sharp eyes moving between Hawk and Olivia. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "The Blackwell gang, you say? That's troubling news. They've never operated this close to Prosperity Junction before." She turned to Olivia. You're certain they were tracking you specifically? Olivia nodded. I overheard them. The leader, Jackson Blackwell, he said something about finding the blonde witness before she could reach the authorities. Jackson Blackwell has a price on his head in 3 territories, Hawk added grimly. If he thinks someone can identify him, he won't stop until they're silenced. Miss Adelaide's expression turned grave. Then we must speak with Sheriff Willard immediately. He should be informed of this threat. I'll go fetch him, Hawk offered, clearly eager for action. No need, Miss Adelaide replied, rising from her chair. Maggie, she called sharply, and a young girl of perhaps 13 appeared in the doorway. Run and tell Sheriff Willard he's needed here urgently. Tell him it concerns the Blackwell gang. The girl nodded and disappeared as quickly as she had appeared. Miss Adelaide turned back to her guests. Now, Miss Thornton, while we wait for the sheriff, let me show you to a room where you can freshen up. I'll have hot water brought up for a bath. She eyed Olivia's tattered dress critically. And we'll need to find you some suitable clothing. Olivia hesitated, suddenly aware of a practical concern. Miss Adelaide, I must confess I have very little money. The bandits took almost everything. The older woman waved away her concern. We'll sort that out later. For now, let's get you presentable. As Miss Adelaide led Olivia toward the stairs, she glanced back at Hawk, who stood awkwardly in the center of the parlor. Their eyes met briefly, and something passed between them, a reluctance to part, even temporarily. I'll wait for the sheriff, Hawk said, answering her unspoken question. We should all hear what he has to say. Upstairs, Miss Adelaide showed Olivia to a small but immaculately clean room furnished with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a simple chest of drawers. A window overlooked the garden behind the house, offering a view of distant mountains bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. This will be yours for now, Miss Adelaide said, opening the window to allow in fresh air. The bathroom is at the end of the hall. I'll have Maggie bring up hot water when she returns. It's lovely, Olivia said sincerely. After her recent ordeal, the simple room seemed like unimaginable luxury. Miss Adelaide studied her with those keen eyes that seemed to miss nothing. You've had quite a journey, haven't you? And I suspect we've heard only part of it. Olivia met the older woman's gaze directly. There's more, yes, but what Mr. Hawkins told you is the truth. I don't doubt that. Xavier Hawkins has his secrets, but dishonesty isn't one of his failings. Miss Adelaide's expression softened slightly. He's a good man, despite his best efforts to convince people otherwise. This unexpected assessment intrigued Olivia. You know him well. Well enough, Miss Adelaide replied cryptically. This is a small community, Miss Thornton. Those of us who have been here a while have crossed paths with most everyone at some point. She moved to the door. I'll find you something to wear. Rest a bit if you can. The sheriff will have many questions. Left alone, Olivia sank gratefully onto the bed, her body reminding her of the physical toll the past days had taken. Despite her exhaustion, her mind remained active, filled with questions about her future and, increasingly, about the enigmatic cowboy who had saved her life. Miss Adelaide's comments suggested there was more to Hawk than met the eye, not that Olivia had doubted it. From the moment she'd awakened to find him tending her by the stream, she'd sensed depths to him that his taciturn manner concealed. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Maggie had returned with 2 other girls, all bearing buckets of steaming water. They filled a copper tub in the bathroom, and one girl handed Olivia a bundle of clothing. Miss Adelaide says these should fit you well enough for now, the girl explained. There's soap and towels on the shelf. Olivia thanked them and, once alone, gratefully shed her filthy, torn dress. The hot bath was pure bliss, washing away days of grime and soothing her aching muscles. She took her time, savoring the simple pleasure of being clean again. The clothes Miss Adelaide had provided were simple but serviceable, a blue cotton dress, slightly faded but clean and well mended, with undergarments that were plain but decent. They were a bit loose on Olivia's frame, but adjusting the belt helped, and after her recent attire, she wasn't inclined to be critical. She brushed out her damp hair with a comb provided on the washstand, wishing for a mirror to assess her appearance. Her last glimpse of herself had been in a shop window in Laramie days ago, and she suspected she looked quite different now. Another knock at the door revealed Miss Adelaide. "Sheriff Willard has arrived," she announced. "Are you feeling up to speaking with him now?" Olivia nodded, smoothing down the borrowed dress. "Yes, I'm ready." As they descended the stairs, Olivia was suddenly conscious of how Hawk would see her now clean, properly dressed, perhaps looking more like the Boston lady she'd once been. The thought sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. Sheriff Willard waited in the parlor with Hawk, the two men standing in conversation by the window. The sheriff was older than Olivia had expected, perhaps in his 50s, with iron gray hair and a neatly trimmed mustache. He turned as the women entered, his experienced eyes quickly assessing Olivia. Hawk, however, was the one whose reaction she found herself watching. His eyes widened slightly as he took in her transformed appearance, and something that might have been appreciation flickered across his face before he schooled his features back to neutrality. "Miss Thornton," the sheriff greeted her, touching the brim of his hat respectfully. "I'm Sheriff James Willard. Mr. Hawkins here has been telling me about your encounter with the Blackwell gang." "Thank you for coming so quickly, Sheriff," Olivia replied, taking a seat when he gestured to the sofa. "The Blackwells aren't to be taken lightly," Sheriff Willard said gravely. "I'd appreciate hearing your account directly, if you're up to it." For the next half hour, Olivia recounted the stagecoach robbery in detail, the sudden ambush on a lonely stretch of road, the methodical way the gang had separated the passengers and relieved them of valuables, and the moment when Jackson Blackwell had personally executed the driver who tried to resist. "I was hidden under the overturned coach," she explained, her voice steady despite the painful memories. "They didn't realize I was there until I tried to escape during the confusion when one passenger attempted to fight back." "And you're certain it was Jackson Blackwell himself?" the sheriff pressed. "You could identify him?" Olivia nodded firmly, without question. "He stood not 10 feet from me, giving orders to the others. I saw his face clearly, the scar through his left eyebrow, the missing tooth when he smiled." She shuddered at the recollection of that cold smile. "I would know him anywhere." Sheriff Willard exchanged a significant look with Hawk. "That makes you a valuable witness, Miss Thornton, and a target." "Which is why she needs protection," Hawk said, speaking for the first time since Olivia had entered the room. "The Blackwells won't give up easily." "Agreed," the sheriff nodded. "For now, Miss Thornton should remain here at the boarding house. Miss Adelaide's establishment is well respected, not the first place outlaws would look for a witness." He stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "But we should consider moving you somewhere less obvious if the gang is spotted in the area." "The Rocking M," Hawk suggested. "Mrs. McAllister would take her in, and the ranch is well defended." Sheriff Willard considered this. "That might be our best option if trouble comes." "I'll ride out tomorrow and speak with the McAllisters." He turned back to Olivia. "In the meantime, Miss Thornton, I'd advise you to keep a low profile. Limit your movements in town and don't discuss your experience with anyone outside this room." "I understand," Olivia agreed, the seriousness of her situation settling over her anew. She had hoped reaching Prosperity Junction would mean safety, but it seemed her ordeal wasn't yet over. "I'll increase patrols on the roads leading to town." the sheriff continued, rising to his feet. And I'll send wires to the territorial marshal and neighboring counties to alert them about the Blackwell's presence in the area. He placed his hat back on his head. Miss Thornton, I may need to speak with you again soon, perhaps to provide a formal statement. Of course, Sheriff. I'll help however I can. After the sheriff departed, a thoughtful silence fell over the parlor. Miss Adelaide was the first to break it. Well, it seems you'll be my guest for longer than anticipated, Miss Thornton, she said briskly. Under the circumstances, I insist you consider this your home until the danger has passed. That's very kind, Olivia began, but I can't impose without nonsense, Miss Adelaide interrupted. This isn't charity if that's your concern. You can assist with household duties in exchange for room and board. I'm short-handed since my last girl left to get married. Relief washed over Olivia. The practical arrangement appealed to her independent nature far more than outright charity would have. Thank you. I accept your offer gladly. Miss Adelaide nodded, satisfied. Good. Now I should see to dinner. You two have much to discuss, I imagine. With that surprisingly perceptive comment, she departed for the kitchen, leaving Hawk and Olivia alone. For a moment neither spoke. Hawk stood by the window, his tall frame silhouetted against the fading light, his expression unreadable. You don't have to stay, Olivia said finally, sensing his discomfort. I know you need to report back to the ranch. Hawk turned to face her fully. I'll stay until morning, he said, his decision apparently just made. Just to be sure everything's settled here. What about your employer? Won't he be expecting you? Morgan knows I sometimes take an extra day or two. A faint smile touched his lips. Benefits of being his best tracker, he allows me certain liberties. Olivia couldn't deny the relief she felt at his decision. Thank you. I know it's not your responsibility, but it is, Hawk interrupted, surprising her with his vehemence. I found you. That makes it my responsibility to see you safe. He paused, seeming to search for words. I don't leave things unfinished. There was something in his tone, a principle firmly held, perhaps born of past regrets, that made Olivia realize this was more than simple duty to him. She nodded, accepting his decision without further argument. Miss Adelaide seems to think highly of you, she observed, changing the subject. A genuine smile briefly transformed Hawk's serious features. She's a remarkable woman. Sees too much, says exactly what she thinks, and has a heart bigger than she lets on. He moved away from the window, taking a seat in the chair opposite Olivia. She helped me once when I first came to these parts. I was in bad shape, fever from an infected wound. She took me in, patched me up, didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. This glimpse into his past intrigued Olivia. She said, you have secrets. Everyone does, Hawk replied, his voice neutral, especially out here. Is that why you came west, to keep your secrets? Hawk studied her with those penetrating hazel eyes. You ask direct questions for a Boston lady. Perhaps I'm not a typical Boston lady, Olivia countered. Or perhaps nearly dying makes one less concerned with social niceties. To her surprise, Hawk laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face and made him look younger, less burdened. Fair point. He leaned back in the chair, his posture relaxing slightly. Yes, I came west partly to leave things behind, but also to find something. And did you find what you were looking for? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He considered it seriously before answering. Parts of it. Freedom, maybe, space to breathe, the rest. He shrugged. Still looking, I suppose. Before Olivia could respond, Miss Adelaide reappeared to announce that dinner was ready. The moment of unusual openness passed, but something had shifted between them, a deepening of understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of a trust that transcended their brief acquaintance. As they followed Miss Adelaide to the dining room, Olivia was struck by the strange turns her life had taken. A week ago, she'd been fleeing Boston in disgrace. Days ago, she'd been running for her life through the Wyoming wilderness. And now, she was walking to dinner beside a man who was still largely a mystery to her, yet who had somehow become the person she trusted most in the world. The future remained uncertain, fraught with dangers she could not fully anticipate. But for the first time since her mother's death, Olivia felt something that had been missing for too long: hope. Dinner at Miss Adelaide's boarding house was a simple but satisfying affair: hearty beef stew, fresh baked bread, and preserves from the proprietress's well-stocked cellar. The dining room hosted several other boarders, two middle-aged schoolteachers sharing quiet conversation at one end of the long oak table, and a young woman Olivia later learned was the telegraph operator's assistant. Hawk was the only male guest, a fact that earned curious glances from the other women. Miss Adelaide, however, had clearly established his presence as something exceptional, and no one questioned it openly. As they ate, Olivia observed the easy way Hawk interacted with the other residents, answering questions about conditions on the range and listening with genuine interest to local gossip. This social side of him surprised her. The solitary man she'd come to know by the stream seemed transformed in this setting, revealing yet another facet of his complex character. "Mr. Hawkins was just telling us about the mountain lion he tracked," Miss Adelaide explained to Olivia. "Apparently, it had been preying on calves at the Rockingham." "Did you kill it?" asked one of the schoolteachers, a bird-like woman with spectacles. Hawk shook his head. "Tracked it to its territory and fired warning shots. It should stay clear of the ranch's grazing land for a while." He glanced at Olivia. "I don't kill unless necessary." Something in his tone, a principle stated simply but firmly, added another piece to the puzzle of this man. A tracker who preferred not to kill, a loner who treated women with innate respect, a man haunted by a past he wouldn't discuss. Xavier Hawkins defied easy categorization. After dinner, Miss Adelaide insisted that Olivia retire early to rest. "You've had enough excitement for one day," she said firmly. "Morning comes early in this house." Olivia couldn't argue with the wisdom of this suggestion. The events of the past days had depleted her reserves, and the comfortable bed upstairs called to her weary body. Still, she found herself reluctant to part from Hawk's reassuring presence. "Will you be staying here tonight?" she asked him quietly as they stood in the hallway. Hawk shook his head. "Miss Adelaide runs a respectable establishment. I'll take a room at the hotel." He must have seen the flicker of concern in her eyes, for he added, "It's just across the street. I'll be nearby if needed." "Of course," Olivia nodded, suddenly embarrassed by her transparent anxiety. "I didn't mean to imply." "No need to explain," Hawk interrupted gently. "It's natural to be uneasy after what you've been through." His understanding eased her discomfort. "Thank you for everything. Get some rest," he replied. "I'll stop by in the morning before I head back to the ranch." With that promise, they parted. Olivia made her way upstairs, her mind full of the day's events and the uncertain future that awaited her. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive as she lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the night sounds of the town so different from the wilderness noises she'd grown accustomed to over the past days. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were a confused jumble of pursuing bandits, rushing streams, and a pair of hazel eyes that seemed to see into her very soul. Morning brought a bustle of activity to the boarding house. Olivia awoke to the sounds of movement downstairs, the clatter of dishes, and female voices engaged in the ordinary business of a new day. For a moment, disorientation gripped her: the soft bed, the clean sheets, The roof overhead all seemed strange after her recent experiences. She dressed quickly in the borrowed clothes, grateful that Miss Adelaide had provided a comb and hairpins to tame her unruly locks. The mirror above the washstand reflected a face she barely recognized, thinner than she remembered, with shadows beneath her eyes but a new determination in her gaze. Downstairs, the dining room was alive with breakfast preparations. Miss Adelaide, already immaculately dressed despite the early hour, directed the young serving girls with brisk efficiency. "Good morning, Miss Thornton," she greeted Olivia. "I trust you slept well." "Better than I have in days," Olivia admitted. "Thank you again for your hospitality." "Nonsense. You're earning your keep, remember? Speaking of which, after breakfast I'll show you your duties." Miss Adelaide's practical approach was oddly comforting. She offered help without pity, dignity without condescension. Breakfast consisted of flapjacks, bacon, and strong coffee. Olivia ate with appreciation, regaining strength with every bite. She was just finishing when a knock at the front door announced Hawk's arrival. He entered the dining room with his hat in hand, having clearly made efforts with his appearance. His clothes, though still worn, were clean, his face freshly shaved except for the neatly trimmed mustache and short beard that framed his jaw. His dark hair, usually hidden beneath his hat, was damp from washing and combed back from his forehead. "Morning, ladies," he greeted the table at large, but his eyes sought out Olivia immediately. "Join us for breakfast, Mr. Hawkins," Miss Adelaide invited. Maggie set another place. Hawk took the offered seat beside Olivia. "Sleep all right?" he asked quietly as the other women engaged in conversation around them. "Yes, thank you," she replied, though it felt strange to be indoors again. He nodded in understanding. "Takes time to readjust. Have you heard anything more from the sheriff?" Olivia kept her voice low, conscious of the other diners. "Stopped by his office on my way here. No news of the Blackwells yet, but he's posted deputies on the main roads into town." Hawk accepted a cup of coffee from Maggie with a nod of thanks. "He's riding out to the Rockingham today to speak with the McAllisters." "About me?" Olivia asked, surprised. "About the possibility of you staying there if necessary," Hawk confirmed. "The ranch is more defensible than the town if trouble comes." The casual way he discussed these arrangements as if her safety were the most natural concern in the world to him touched Olivia deeply. "You've done so much already. I don't know how to thank you." Hawk looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just doing what needs doing." He turned his attention to his breakfast, effectively closing that line of conversation. After the meal, as the other boarders dispersed to their daily activities, Miss Adelaide drew Olivia aside to explain her duties, helping with breakfast and dinner preparations, assisting with laundry, and keeping the common areas tidy. The work was straightforward but honest, and Olivia welcomed the chance to earn her keep. Hawk watched this exchange from the doorway, his expression thoughtful. When Miss Adelaide finished, he approached them. "I should head back to the ranch," he said, his reluctance evident despite his matter-of-fact tone. "Morgan will be wondering what happened to me." "Of course," Olivia nodded, fighting down an irrational disappointment. "You've been away from your work too long already." Miss Adelaide, displaying her uncanny perceptiveness, suddenly remembered urgent business in the kitchen, leaving them alone in the hallway. Hawk shifted his weight, seemingly uncertain how to proceed. "Sheriff Willard knows where to find you if there's news, and Miss Adelaide will look after you." "I'll be fine," Olivia assured him, more confidently than she felt. "Please don't worry about me." "Can't help that," he admitted quietly, the simple honesty of the statement causing her heart to flutter unexpectedly. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, neither quite ready for the farewell that logic demanded. Finally, Hawk reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. Nearly forgot. Found this by the stream where you fell. He held out his hand, revealing her mother's gold wedding band, which must have slipped from her finger during her collapse. Thought it might be important to you. Olivia gasped, tears springing to her eyes as she accepted the precious memento. My mother's ring. I thought I'd lost it forever. She clutched it tightly, overcome with emotion. How did you even see it? Hawk shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with her emotional response. Tracker's eyes noticed small things. Thank you, she whispered, impulsively reaching out to touch his arm. This means more than I can say. Their eyes met and held, something unspoken passing between them. For a breathless moment, Olivia thought he might say more, might somehow articulate the strange connection that had formed between them in their short acquaintance. Instead, he stepped back, placing his hat firmly on his head. I should go. Samson's getting restless. Of course, Olivia nodded, composing herself. Safe travels, Hawk. He touched the brim of his hat in that courtly gesture she'd come to recognize. Take care of yourself, Olivia Thornton. And then he was gone, the front door closing behind him with a quiet finality that left Olivia standing alone in the hallway, her mother's ring clutched in her palm and an unfamiliar ache in her heart. She moved to the window, watching as he mounted Samson and rode away down the dusty main street. Only when he disappeared from view did she acknowledge the truth that had been growing within her since she first awakened to find him tending her by the stream. She was falling in love with Xavier Hawkins, a man she barely knew yet somehow trusted with her life. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it settled into her heart like a seed taking root, bringing with it a certainty she couldn't explain but couldn't deny. Whether she would ever see him again, whether anything could come of these feelings, these were questions without answers. For now, she had a new life to build and dangers to face. But as she turned away from the window, slipping her mother's ring onto her finger, Olivia knew with inexplicable confidence that her path and Hawk's would cross again. The next week passed in a blur of activity as Olivia settled into life at Miss Adelaide's boarding house. The routine of daily chores, helping prepare meals, assisting with laundry, tidying the common rooms, provided a comforting structure after the chaos of recent events. More importantly, the work allowed her to feel useful rather than dependent, preserving her dignity even as she accepted help. Miss Adelaide proved to be a demanding but fair employer, exacting in her standards but generous with praise when deserved. Under her brisk tutelage, Olivia learned the efficient running of a Western household, so different from the elaborate Boston home where servants had managed all domestic matters. You have good hands, Miss Adelaide observed one afternoon as Olivia expertly mended a tablecloth. Quick to learn practical skills. My mother insisted I learn needlework, though I never thought I'd rely on it, Olivia admitted. She believed a lady should be accomplished regardless of her circumstances. A wise woman, your mother. Miss Adelaide settled into a nearby chair with her account books. Tell me more about your family, if you don't mind. It helps to know who's under my roof. Over the next hour, Olivia shared more of her story, her privileged upbringing in Boston, her father's shipping business, his death during the war, and her mother's subsequent remarriage to Arthur Chambers, a business associate who had seemed respectable and caring until he revealed his true nature after her mother's death. He'd been embezzling from the company for years, Olivia explained, her hands continuing their steady work with the needle. When I discovered the discrepancies in the accounts and confronted him, She paused, the memory still painful. He struck me. Said no one would believe the word of a hysterical woman over a respected businessman. So you fled, Miss Adelaide concluded, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Olivia nodded. with what little money I could gather quickly. I thought if I could reach San Francisco, where my aunt lives, I might start over. She smiled wryly. The stagecoach robbery wasn't part of my plan. Life rarely follows our plans, Miss Adelaide observed dryly, particularly out here. What about you? Olivia asked, curious about this remarkable woman who had built a respectable business in such a challenging environment. What brought you to Prosperity Junction? Miss Adelaide's usually stern expression softened slightly. A man, initially. I was a Harvey girl in my youth serving meals to railroad passengers. Met a mining engineer who promised me the moon and stars if I'd follow him to Wyoming. She shook her head at the memory. The mine played out in 6 months, and he moved on to the next opportunity without a backward glance. I'm sorry, Olivia said, genuine sympathy in her voice. Don't be, Miss Adelaide replied briskly. Best thing that could have happened to me. I had savings and sense enough to see an opportunity in this growing town. Women of good character were scarce, and respectable lodgings for them even scarcer. She gestured around her at the comfortable home she'd created. I built this myself, brick by brick. No man's name on the deed, no husband to answer to. I'm my own mistress. The pride in her voice resonated with something in Olivia's heart, a yearning for that same independence, that same self-determination. Now, Miss Adelaide continued, changing the subject, have you given thought to more permanent employment? Room and board here is a start, but a young woman needs purpose beyond daily chores. I've been considering possibilities, Olivia admitted. The sheriff mentioned the town is seeking a school teacher. Indeed they are. The last one left to marry a rancher 3 months ago. Miss Adelaide eyed Olivia speculatively. You have the education for it, I'd wager. I attended Miss Porter's school in Connecticut, Olivia confirmed, and I've always enjoyed working with children. In Boston, I volunteered at a charity school in the North End. Well then, Miss Adelaide nodded decisively. I'll speak with Mayor Hollister tomorrow. The school term should begin soon, and they're growing desperate for a qualified teacher. The prospect of meaningful work, of contributing to her new community, lifted Olivia's spirits considerably. Thank you. I'd be most grateful. As the days passed, Olivia gradually became familiar with Prosperity Junction and its inhabitants. The town was smaller than she'd initially thought, a single main street flanked by wooden buildings in various states of repair, with smaller residential streets branching out like tributaries from a river. The promised boom had never fully materialized, leaving the town in a state of suspended anticipation, neither growing nor declining but simply persisting. Despite its modest size, the community was surprisingly diverse. Merchants and tradespeople, ranchers from outlying properties, miners from the northern hills, and a small but vibrant Chinese community all coexisted with varying degrees of harmony. Olivia found herself welcomed with the curious hospitality of frontier towns, where newcomers were both objects of interest and potential assets to the community's survival. Throughout this period of adjustment, one absence remained conspicuous. Hawk had not returned to town since their parting, though Sheriff Willard occasionally brought news from the Rockingham Ranch. The Blackwell gang, too, remained ominously absent. No sightings had been reported in the area, which both relieved and unsettled Olivia. Were they truly gone, or simply biding their time? On the 8th day after her arrival, as Olivia was returning from an interview with the town council about the teaching position, she noticed unusual activity at the sheriff's office. Several horses were tied outside, and men stood in serious conversation on the boardwalk. Curiosity and concern prompted her to approach. Sheriff Willard spotted her and beckoned her over, his expression grave. Miss Thornton, good timing. We've just received some news you should hear." He gestured to a tall, distinguished-looking man beside him. "This is U.S. Marshal Robert Parker from Cheyenne. He's been tracking the Blackwell gang." Marshal Parker touched his hat respectfully. "Miss Thornton, Sheriff Willard has told me about your encounter with the gang." "Has there been news of them?" Olivia asked, anxiety tightening her chest. "There has," the marshal confirmed. "They were spotted 2 days ago near Medicine Bow, heading this direction. Given their usual patterns, I believe they may be planning another stagecoach robbery on the Laramie Road. Or they could be looking for Miss Thornton," Sheriff Willard added grimly. "Either way, it's cause for concern." "Indeed," Marshal Parker agreed. "Which is why I believe it would be prudent for you to relocate temporarily, Miss Thornton, somewhere less obvious than the town." "The Rockingham," Sheriff Willard suggested immediately. "As we discussed, I spoke with the McAllisters and they're prepared to offer you sanctuary if needed." "The McAllisters," Marshal Parker looked thoughtful. "Morgan McAllister's spread. Good choice. Defensible position, loyal hands, far enough from town to be inconspicuous." Olivia's heart beat faster at the suggestion. The ranch where Hawk worked. The possibility of seeing him again sent an unexpected thrill through her, despite the serious circumstances. "When would I need to leave?" she asked, striving to keep her voice calm and practical. "Today, if possible," Sheriff Willard replied. "I've already sent word to the ranch. They're sending someone to escort you." As if summoned by the sheriff's words, a rider appeared at the far end of the street, the distinctive figure of a tall man on a dun horse, immediately recognizable to Olivia despite the distance. Her pulse quickened as Hawk approached, dismounting in front of the sheriff's office with fluid grace. "Afternoon, Sheriff. Marshal." He nodded to each man before his eyes found Olivia's. Something flickered in their hazel depths, relief perhaps, or a more complex emotion she couldn't name. "Miss Thornton, Mr. Hawkins," she replied formally, conscious of their audience despite the rush of joy she felt at seeing him again. Sheriff Willard quickly explained the situation, though from Hawk's lack of surprise, Olivia gathered he'd already been briefed. "Morgan sent me to bring Miss Thornton to the ranch," Hawk confirmed. "Mrs. McAllister has a room prepared." "How soon can you leave?" Marshal Parker asked. "As soon as Miss Thornton can gather her things," Hawk replied, looking to her for confirmation. Olivia nodded. "I don't have much." "It won't take long." "I'll accompany you to Miss Adelaide's," Sheriff Willard offered. "Explain the situation to her." As they walked the short distance to the boarding house, Olivia was acutely aware of Hawk's presence beside her. He moved with the same quiet confidence she remembered, his tall frame casting a protective shadow that somehow made her feel safer despite the renewed danger. "How have you been?" she asked quietly, falling into step beside him while the sheriff walked ahead. "Well enough," he replied, his voice softening slightly when addressing her directly. "Ranch keeps me busy. I'm adjusting," she said. "Everyone has been kind. I may have secured a position as the town schoolteacher, though I suppose that will have to wait now." "It won't be forever," Hawk assured her. "Just until the Blackwells are dealt with." There was something in his tone, a grim certainty that suggested he had given considerable thought to the dealing with of the Blackwell gang. Before Olivia could pursue this, they reached the boarding house, where Miss Adelaide received the news of her imminent departure with practical concern. "How long will she be gone?" she asked Sheriff Willard as Olivia hurried upstairs to pack her few belongings. "Difficult to say," the sheriff replied. "Until the Blackwells are captured or move on to another territory." "And who will ensure her safety at the ranch?" Miss Adelaide pressed, her sharp eyes moving to Hawk. "The McAllisters run a tight operation," Hawk answered. "Trusted hands, good security." and I'll be nearby." Something in his simple statement reassured both women. Miss Adelaide nodded, apparently satisfied. "See that you are, Mr. Hawkins." Her tone made it clear she was entrusting him with a responsibility he'd better not take lightly. Olivia returned quickly with a small carpet bag containing the few clothes Miss Adelaide had provided, and her mother's locket and ring, her only real possessions. She had changed into a riding skirt borrowed from one of the other boarders, practical for the journey ahead. "Be careful, my dear," Miss Adelaide said, embracing her briefly but warmly. "Your position will be waiting when you return." "Thank you for everything," Olivia replied, genuinely moved by the older woman's concern. Outside, Hawk helped her mount Samson before swinging up behind her, just as they had ridden days before. The familiar arrangement, his solid presence at her back, his arms reaching around her to hold the reins, brought a sense of déjà vu so powerful it momentarily took her breath away. "Ready?" he asked, his voice close to her ear. Olivia nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As they rode out of town, the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon, she found herself torn between fear of the danger that had driven her from her new refuge and an inexplicable sense of rightness at being once again on the trail with Xavier Hawkins. Whatever awaited her at the Rockingham Ranch, she faced it with the strange certainty that fate had orchestrated this reunion for reasons she could not yet fathom, but was increasingly eager to discover. The journey to the Rockingham took longer than Olivia expected. They rode east from Prosperity Junction, following a well-traveled ranch road that wound through rolling grasslands dotted with stands of pine and aspen. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape, painting the scene in hues of gold and amber. Hawk rode at a measured pace, mindful of Samson carrying double and alert to their surroundings. His vigilance was subtle but constant, eyes scanning the horizon, head turning at the slightest unusual sound. It reminded Olivia of their first journey together, except this time she was fully conscious and increasingly aware of his physical proximity. "How far is it to the ranch?" she asked, breaking a companionable silence. "Another hour or so," Hawk replied. "We're taking a roundabout route, just to be safe." "You think we might be followed?" Hawk's voice remained calm, but his body tensed slightly behind her. "Not likely, but caution costs nothing. Marshall Parker believes the Blackwells are focused on the Laramie Road for now." "But you're not convinced?" He hesitated before answering. "Jackson Blackwell didn't build his reputation by being predictable. If he's decided you're a threat, he'll be resourceful in hunting you down." The blunt assessment sent a chill through Olivia despite the warm afternoon. "You've encountered him before, haven't you? There's something personal in your voice when you speak of him." Hawk remained silent so long that Olivia thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, as if carefully choosing each word. 3 years ago, the Blackwells raided a settlement north of here, small place called Willow Creek." He paused, the memories clearly difficult. "I was tracking for the army then. By the time we arrived, they'd killed most of the men, taken what they wanted, and moved on." "How terrible," Olivia murmured, sensing there was more to the story. "Among the dead was a man named Thomas Cooper. Good man. Friend of mine from the war." Hawk's voice remained steady, but Olivia could feel the tension in his body. "He'd started a new life there, had a wife, infant daughter. They survived the raid, but Grace, his wife, she never really recovered from what she witnessed. Took her own life 6 months later." "The child?" Olivia asked softly, dreading the answer. "Sarah. She's with her mother's sister in Denver now." A pause, then. "I send money when I can." The simple statement revealed more about Hawk's character than 1,000 words could have. His sense of responsibility, his loyalty, The depth of feeling beneath his reserved exterior all were laid bare in that quiet admission. "Is that why you help me? Because I remind you of them?" "No," Hawk replied immediately, his voice certain. "This is different." He didn't elaborate, and Olivia didn't press, but his answer warmed her in ways she couldn't articulate. They rode on in silence for a time, each lost in private thoughts as the landscape gradually changed, the grasslands giving way to more cultivated terrain. Eventually, Hawk guided Samson up a gentle rise, pausing at the top. "There it is," he said, gesturing ahead. "The Rocking M." Olivia's first impression was of scale and order. The ranch spread across a broad valley, bordered by a meandering creek and distant foothills. At its center stood a substantial two-story house built of squared logs and stone, surrounded by various outbuildings, barns, bunkhouses, corrals, and storage sheds, all arranged with practical efficiency. In the near pastures, cattle grazed contentedly, while in the distance, riders moved among larger herds. "It's impressive," Olivia said sincerely. "Morgan started with nothing 20 years ago," Hawk replied, a note of respect in his voice. "Built it all through hard work and smart decisions." As they descended toward the ranch, activity became visible in the yard. A woman emerged from the main house, shading her eyes against the setting sun as she watched their approach. Beside her stood a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver-streaked dark hair, his stance suggesting authority tempered with ease. "The McAllisters," Hawk explained. "Morgan and Elizabeth." They rode into the yard, where a young, stable hand immediately appeared to take charge of Samson. Hawk dismounted first, then reached up to help Olivia down. His hands at her waist were strong and sure, steadying her as her feet touched the ground. For a brief moment, they stood too close for propriety before Hawk stepped back, turning to greet their hosts. "Morgan, Mrs. McAllister," he nodded respectfully. "This is Miss Olivia Thornton." Morgan McAllister stepped forward, offering his hand with forthright courtesy. He was older than Olivia had expected, perhaps in his 50s, with weathered features that spoke of years under the western sun and clear blue eyes that assessed her with keen intelligence. "Welcome to the Rockingham, Miss Thornton," he said, his voice carrying the faint traces of a Scottish accent. "Sheriff Willard explained your situation. You're welcome to stay as long as necessary." "Thank you, Mr. McAllister," Olivia replied, immediately liking his direct manner. "I appreciate your hospitality." Elizabeth McAllister moved forward then, taking Olivia's hands in her own. She was a striking woman in her 40s, with chestnut hair streaked with silver and warm brown eyes that reflected both intelligence and compassion. "We're glad to help, Miss Thornton," she said with genuine warmth. "I've had a room prepared for you in the house. You must be exhausted after your journey." "Please call me Olivia," she replied, responding instinctively to the older woman's kindness. "And I'm Elizabeth," Mrs. McAllister smiled. "Formality has its place, but this is a home, not a hotel." Morgan turned to Hawk, his manner shifting subtly to that of employer to trusted hand. "Any sign of trouble on the ride?" "None," Hawk replied. "Took the eastern route, kept to cover where possible." Morgan nodded, satisfied. "Good." "Marshal Parker sent word he's setting up patrols on the main roads, but we'll increase our own security regardless." He glanced at the darkening sky. "You'll stay for supper, of course." It wasn't a question, but Hawk nodded his acceptance. "Thank you, sir." "Come inside, both of you," Elizabeth urged, linking her arm through Olivia's with easy familiarity. "You can freshen up before the meal." As they moved toward the house, Olivia glanced back to see Hawk and Morgan deep in conversation, their expressions serious. She gathered they were discussing security arrangements, and the reminder of the danger that had brought her here momentarily dampened her spirits. Elizabeth, perceptive as she was kind, noticed the change in her demeanor. "Try not to worry too much," she said quietly. "The ranch is well protected, and Hawk says you're quite resourceful yourself." The comment surprised Olivia. "Hawk discussed me with you." A knowing smile touched Elizabeth's lips. "He mentioned finding you by the stream, how you'd survived on your own after the stagecoach robbery." He seemed impressed. Something in her tone suggested there might have been more to Hawk's comments than mere factual reporting. But before Olivia could pursue this intriguing possibility, they entered the ranch house. The interior was a revelation, spacious, well-appointed, and unexpectedly refined. Polished wood floors were covered with colorful woven rugs. The furniture, though sturdy and practical, showed evidence of careful craftsmanship. Shelves of books lined one wall of the large main room, while landscape paintings and framed photographs adorned others. "This is lovely," Olivia said with genuine admiration. "Not at all what I expected." Elizabeth laughed, a warm, musical sound. "Most people imagine ranch houses to be little more than glorified cabins. Morgan built this place to last, and I've tried to make it comfortable without being pretentious." She led Olivia upstairs to a pleasant corner bedroom furnished with a brass bed, a washstand, and a small writing desk beneath a window that overlooked the eastern pastures. "I hope you'll be comfortable here," Elizabeth said, showing her the wardrobe where fresh towels had been stored. "The bathroom is at the end of the hall. We're fortunate to have indoor plumbing, one of Morgan's concessions to my Eastern sensibilities, as he calls them." "It's perfect," Olivia assured her, setting down her small bag. "I can't thank you enough for taking me in like this." "Nonsense," Elizabeth waved away her gratitude. "Any decent person would do the same." She paused, studying Olivia with kind but perceptive eyes. "Besides, Hawk rarely asks for favors. When he does, there's usually a good reason." Before Olivia could respond to this intriguing statement, Elizabeth continued briskly. "I'll leave you to freshen up. Supper is at 6. Just follow the aromas when you're ready." Left alone, Olivia took a moment to absorb her new surroundings. The room was simple but comfortable. The bed covered with a handmade quilt in shades of blue and green that complemented the cream-colored walls. Fresh wildflowers stood in a pottery vase on the bedside table, a thoughtful touch that spoke volumes about Elizabeth McAllister's character. After washing away the dust of travel and changing into the cleanest of her borrowed dresses, Olivia made her way downstairs, following the promised aromas of cooking food. She found the dining room easily enough, a handsome space dominated by a long table of polished oak, set for 4 with surprisingly fine china and silver. Voices led her to the kitchen, where she discovered Elizabeth directing a Chinese cook in final meal preparations while Morgan and Hawk stood nearby, still deep in conversation. All three looked up as she entered. "Ah, Miss Thornton," Morgan greeted her. "Just in time. Chen has outdone himself tonight." The cook, a middle-aged man with a serious expression, nodded politely at the introduction. "Welcome, miss," he said in accented but clear English before returning to his work. Hawk's eyes met Olivia's briefly across the room, and something in his gaze, appreciation, perhaps, or a more personal recognition, sent warmth spreading through her. He had also freshened up, she noticed, his hair still damp from washing and his clothes changed for cleaner ones, though they remained the practical attire of a working cowboy. Dinner proved to be a surprisingly pleasant affair, despite the circumstances that had brought Olivia to the ranch. The food was excellent: roast beef, fresh vegetables from Elizabeth's garden, and sourdough bread still warm from the oven. The conversation flowed easily, with Morgan and Elizabeth making considerate efforts to include Olivia without pressing her about her recent ordeal. "Hawk tells me you're being considered for the teaching position in town," Elizabeth remarked as they enjoyed apple pie for dessert. "Yes, though I'm not sure what will happen now with this delay," Olivia replied. "The school board will wait," Morgan assured her. "Good teachers are too scarce to lose over a temporary absence. Were you a teacher before coming west?" Elizabeth asked. Olivia explained her background briefly, touching on her education and her volunteer work at the charity school in Boston, but carefully avoiding the more painful aspects of her departure from the East. "We desperately need educated women out here," Elizabeth said with feeling. "I came west as a teacher myself, determined to bring civilization to the frontier." She smiled at her husband. "Found more than I bargained for." Morgan's expression softened as he looked at his wife, revealing the deep bond between them. "She thought I was a hopeless case," he confided to Olivia. "Too rough around the edges for a Philadelphia lady." "You were," Elizabeth teased. "Still are in some ways, but you had a good heart under all that cowboy bluster." Their obvious affection for each other after years of marriage was both touching and slightly painful for Olivia to witness. It represented everything she had once hoped for in her own life, a true partnership based on mutual respect and genuine love. Throughout the meal, she was increasingly aware of Hawk's quiet presence across the table. He participated in the conversation sparingly but attentively, his comments revealing a thoughtful intelligence that belied his taciturn manner. Occasionally, she would glance up to find his eyes on her, his expression unreadable but intense, before he would look away, refocusing on his plate or responding to a remark from Morgan. After dinner, they moved to the comfortable sitting room where Morgan poured small glasses of brandy for the adults. The conversation turned inevitably to the threat that had brought Olivia to the ranch. "Marshall Parker believes the Blackwells may attempt another stagecoach robbery," Morgan explained, settling into his armchair. "But he's also concerned they might be specifically hunting for you, Miss Thornton." "Olivia, please," she reminded him, appreciating his directness. And yes, that was the marshal's concern. "Jackson Blackwell seemed particularly determined to find me after I escaped. He's not a man who tolerates loose ends," Hawk said quietly from his position by the fireplace. "A witness who could identify him represents a significant threat to his operation." "Precisely why you're safer here than in town," Morgan agreed. "The ranch is well guarded and few outside our immediate circle know you're here." "We've increased patrols on the property boundaries," Hawk added. "And all the hands have been alerted to report any strangers in the area." The methodical security preparations reassured Olivia, though they also underscored the seriousness of her situation. "How long do you think I'll need to stay hidden?" Morgan and Hawk exchanged glances. "Hard to say," Morgan admitted. "The marshal hopes to intercept the gang if they attempt the stagecoach robbery. If he succeeds, the danger would be eliminated." "And if he doesn't?" Olivia pressed, determined to understand the full reality of her circumstances. "Then we continue to keep you safe until other arrangements can be made," Morgan replied firmly. "You have my word on that." The conversation gradually shifted to lighter topics as the evening progressed. Elizabeth shared stories of her early days at the ranch, the challenges of adapting to frontier life after Philadelphia society, and her efforts to establish a small school for the children of ranch hands and nearby homesteaders. "I still teach occasionally," she explained. "Though these days my students are mostly the younger ranch hands who want to improve their reading or figures." As the mantel clock struck 9, Elizabeth rose. "I should show you the rest of the house, Olivia, before it gets too late. You must be tired after your journey." Understanding this as a tactful suggestion that the evening was concluding, Olivia stood and thanked Morgan for his hospitality. As the women prepared to leave the room, Hawk also rose from his chair. "I should head to the bunkhouse," he said. "Early start tomorrow." Morgan nodded. "Check with Ramirez about the north pasture rotation before you turn in." "Will do," Hawk acknowledged, then turned to Olivia. His expression softened slightly as their eyes met. "Good night, Miss Thornton. Rest well." "Good night, Mr. Hawkins," she replied formally, aware of their audience. "And thank you again for your escort today." A brief nod was his only response before he departed, but something in his gaze a warmth. A connection stayed with Olivia as Elizabeth showed her around the remainder of the house. Later, as she prepared for bed in her comfortable room, Olivia found herself reflecting on the day's events and the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been unconscious and alone by a wilderness stream. Now she was a guest in one of the territory's finest ranch houses, possibly falling in love with a taciturn cowboy with secrets in his past and determination in his eyes. As she drifted toward sleep, the last image in her mind was of Hawk standing by the fireplace, the dancing flames illuminating his strong profile as he watched over her from across the room, a sentinel, a protector, and perhaps, though she hardly dared hope for it, something more. Life at the Rocking M quickly settled into a rhythm that Olivia found both comforting and invigorating. Elizabeth McAllister proved to be not only a gracious hostess, but a potential friend, including Olivia in the daily activities of running the ranch house without making her feel like an intruder or a burden. "I could use the help, to be honest," Elizabeth confided on Olivia's second morning as they worked together in the kitchen garden. "Managing a household this size is no small task, especially during the busy seasons." "I'm happy to assist however I can," Olivia replied sincerely, enjoying the simple pleasure of working with her hands in the rich soil. "Though I'm afraid my gardening skills are limited to ornamental plants, my mother's rose garden was my only experience in Boston." Elizabeth laughed. "Well, vegetables are less temperamental than roses in my experience. They ask only for water, sun, and occasional attention to keep the weeds at bay." As they worked side by side, Elizabeth shared stories of her early days at the ranch, her initial shock at the primitive conditions, her determination to create a real home in the wilderness, and her growing love for both the land and the taciturn Scotsman who had brought her there. "Morgan thought I'd return east within a month," she recalled with amusement. "He underestimated my stubbornness." "It must have been a tremendous adjustment," Olivia observed, trying to imagine the refined Philadelphia lady Elizabeth had once been, confronting the harsh realities of frontier life. "It was," Elizabeth acknowledged, "but there's a freedom here I never found in society drawing rooms, room to breathe, to become fully yourself without the constant judgment of others." She glanced at Olivia perceptively. "Perhaps you've begun to feel that too." The observation struck close to home. Despite the danger that had driven her to the ranch, Olivia had indeed experienced an unexpected sense of liberation in the West, a chance to define herself by her own actions rather than by family connections or social expectations. "I think I have," she admitted. "Though my circumstances are hardly ideal, few of us come west under ideal circumstances," Elizabeth replied wisely. "Most are running from something or searching for something, often both at once." The comment naturally turned Olivia's thoughts to Hawk. In the 3 days since their arrival at the ranch, she had seen him only briefly and always at a distance, riding out with the other hands at dawn, returning at dusk, his tall figure distinguishable even from afar. Morgan had explained that Hawk was leading the increased security patrols around the ranch boundaries, a task that kept him away from the main house for most of each day. His absence left Olivia with mixed feelings, disappointment at the lost opportunity to further their acquaintance, yet understanding of his dedication to his duties, especially when those duties involved her protection. Still, she found herself watching for him, her heart beating a little faster on the rare occasions when their paths crossed in the yard or at the corrals. On the fourth evening, as Olivia helped Elizabeth prepare vegetables for dinner, their conversation turned to the ranch hands, including Hawk. "He's Morgan's most trusted man," Elizabeth explained, skillfully slicing carrots. "Not the foreman, that's Jim Brennan, but Morgan relies on Hawk's judgment in ways that go beyond ordinary ranch work. Because of his tracking skills." Olivia asked, curious to learn more about him from someone who clearly knew him well. "Partly that," Elizabeth nodded, "but it's more his character. Hawk sees things others miss, understands situations and people with an instinct that's almost uncanny. Morgan says he has old eyes, the kind that have witnessed more than their years would suggest." "He doesn't speak much about his past," Olivia observed carefully. A knowing smile touched Elizabeth's lips. "No, he doesn't. Not to most people, anyway." She paused in her work, regarding Olivia thoughtfully. "He spoke of you, though, after he returned from finding you by the stream." Olivia's hand stilled on the potato she was peeling. "What did he say?" "Not much, in typical Hawk fashion," Elizabeth replied with a small laugh. "But it was how he said it. There was a quality in his voice I hadn't heard before." She resumed her slicing, adding casually, "He's been alone a long time, by choice, I believe, rather than circumstance." The implications of this observation sent a flutter of both hope and uncertainty through Olivia's heart. Before she could formulate a response, the kitchen door opened, and the subject of their conversation appeared in the doorway. Hawk stood there, hat in hand, still dusty from the trail but somehow managing to look composed despite the long day's work. His eyes found Olivia immediately, a flash of something pleasure, surprise, crossing his face before his expression returned to its usual reserve. "Evening, Mrs. McAllister," he nodded respectfully. "Miss Thornton." "Hawk," Elizabeth greeted him warmly. "Perfect timing. Morgan was hoping to speak with you before dinner. He's in his study." "Thank you, madam." He hesitated, his eyes moving to Olivia again. "Marshal Parker sent word from town. Thought you might want to know." "Is there news?" Olivia asked, setting aside the potato and wiping her hands on her apron. Hawk nodded. "The stagecoach from Laramie arrived safely this morning. No sign of the Blackwells on that route." "That's good news, isn't it?" Olivia said, though something in his tone suggested otherwise. "It is and it isn't," Hawk replied carefully. "Good that no one was harmed, but it means the gang is either lying low or focused on finding me," Olivia finished quietly. Their eyes held for a long moment, and Olivia was struck anew by the intensity of his gaze, not merely concern for her safety, but something deeper, more personal. "We'll discuss it after I speak with Morgan," Hawk said finally. "Dinner still at 6, Mrs. McAllister." "On the dot," Elizabeth confirmed. "And Hawk, you're welcome to join us at the house tonight rather than eating with the hands." A brief smile touched his lips. "Appreciate the invitation, madam." After he left, Elizabeth gave Olivia a sidelong glance that held both amusement and understanding. "As I was saying, he's been alone a long time." Olivia felt her cheeks warm but didn't deny the implication. There was little point in pretending her interest in Hawk was purely practical, at least not to someone as perceptive as Elizabeth McAllister. Dinner that evening had a different quality with Hawk at the table, a subtle tension that had nothing to do with the discussion of the Blackwells, and everything to do with the careful dance between two people drawn to each other, but constrained by circumstances and their own reservations. After the meal, Morgan invited them all to his study to review the latest information from Marshall Parker. A map of the territory was spread across his desk, with markers indicating known sightings of the Blackwell gang over the past weeks. The marshal believes they've established a temporary camp somewhere in this region, Morgan explained, indicating a rugged area of foothills northeast of the ranch. If so, they're within a day's ride of both the town and the Rockingham. Why haven't they attempted another robbery? Olivia asked, studying the map. If not the stagecoach, then something else. Good question, Hawk said, his tone suggesting he'd been wondering the same thing. Blackwell usually doesn't let his men stay idle for long, bad for discipline. Unless they have a specific target in mind, Morgan suggested grimly. Something worth waiting for. The implication hung heavy in the air. Olivia swallowed hard, fighting down a surge of fear. Me, you mean? It's possible, Morgan acknowledged, not sugarcoating the situation. But it's equally possible they're planning something larger, a bank robbery, perhaps, or waiting for a gold shipment. Either way, our security remains essential, Elizabeth said firmly. Olivia stays here, protected, until the marshal has concrete information one way or the other. Morgan nodded agreement. I've instructed the hands to work in pairs, and we've doubled the night watch. No one enters ranch property without being observed. What about when I do need to return to town? Olivia asked practically. I can't hide forever. Let's cross that bridge when we come to it, Morgan advised. For now, the safest place for you is here. The discussion continued, focusing on practical security measures and communication protocols with the marshal's office in town. Throughout, Olivia was aware of Hawk's quiet presence beside her, his comments few but insightful, his attention seemingly divided between the tactical discussion and her reactions to it. As the evening grew late, Elizabeth suggested it was time to retire, sensitive as always to Olivia's comfort. As they prepared to leave the study, Hawk spoke up unexpectedly. Miss Thornton, if you have a moment, there's something I'd like to discuss. Surprised but pleased, Olivia nodded. Of course. Elizabeth exchanged a knowing glance with her husband. Don't keep her too late, Hawk. It's been a long day for everyone. Left alone with Hawk in the study, Olivia felt a sudden flutter of nerves. He stood by the window, his tall figure silhouetted against the night sky, his expression thoughtful as he gazed out at the darkened ranch yard. What did you want to discuss? She prompted when he remained silent. Hawk turned to face her, his eyes serious in the lamplight. I've been thinking about your situation. The waiting, the uncertainty it can wear on a person. His perception touched her. Few people had recognized how difficult the enforced passivity was for her, not just the confinement, but the helplessness of being a target, always reacting rather than acting. It does, she admitted. Though everyone here has been wonderfully kind. The McAllisters are good people, Hawk agreed. But kindness doesn't erase the fear, or the feeling that your life is on hold until someone else, Blackwell or the marshal, makes their move. Exactly, Olivia said, surprised and moved by his understanding. I've never been good at waiting for others to determine my fate. A hint of a smile touched Hawk's lips. I noticed that about you by the stream. Even half dead from exposure, you had a determination most men would envy. The compliment warmed her, especially coming from someone whose own strength and resilience she had come to admire deeply. What do you suggest? She asked, sensing he had something specific in mind. Hawk hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. I can teach you to defend yourself. Basic shooting, situational awareness, how to move through rough country without leaving obvious trails. He met her eyes directly. It won't eliminate the danger, but it might give you back some sense of control. The offer surprised her, not because of its nature, but because it revealed how well he had come to understand her in their brief acquaintance. Most men would have focused solely on protecting her. Hawk recognized her need to participate actively in her own safety. "I'd like that," she said simply. "Very much." Relief flickered across his face as if he'd expected refusal. "We can start tomorrow if Morgan approves." "Nothing that would take me away from regular duties, but there's time in the evenings." "Thank you," Olivia said, putting genuine feeling into the words. "Not just for the offer, but for understanding why it matters." Something shifted in Hawk's expression, a softening, a momentary lowering of the guard he kept so carefully in place. "You're not what I expected, Olivia Thornton." The use of her first name, rare from his lips, sent a thrill through her. "What did you expect when I found you by the stream?" He considered the question seriously. "A Eastern lady out of her depth, I suppose, someone who'd crumble once the initial crisis passed. And instead I found someone with steel in her spine and fire in her heart," he said quietly. "Someone who adapts and endures, who faces her fears instead of succumbing to them." The assessment, delivered with such simple conviction, moved Olivia deeply. Coming from him, a man who clearly valued strength and resilience, it felt like the highest possible praise. "I could say the same about my expectations of the cowboy who found me," she replied, matching his honesty with her own. "You're not what I expected either, Xavier Hawkins." Their eyes held in the warm lamplight, the connection between them palpable in the quiet room. For a breathless moment, Olivia thought he might move closer, might finally bridge the careful distance he'd maintained between them. Instead, he glanced away, gathering himself visibly. "It's late. You should rest." Disappointment flickered through her, but Olivia understood. Whatever was growing between them was too new, too uncertain to rush. And their circumstances, her status as someone under his protection, the external threats that had brought them together complicated matters further. "Good night, then," she said, moving toward the door. "And thank you again." "Olivia," he called softly as her hand touched the doorknob. She turned, heart quickening at his use of her name. "Be ready at sundown tomorrow. Wear practical clothes, sturdy boots if you have them." She nodded, smiling at his return to practicality. "I'll be ready." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Olivia realized that despite the continuing danger from the Blackwells, despite the uncertainty of her future, she felt more alive, more present in her own life than she had in years. The West was changing her, challenging her in ways she'd never anticipated. And Xavier Hawkins, with his quiet strength and unexpected perception, was becoming central to that transformation in ways that both exhilarated and terrified her. The following evening marked the beginning of a new routine that quickly became the highlight of Olivia's days at the Rocking M. True to his word, Hawk appeared at sundown, leading 2 horses, Samson and a gentle bay mare named Willow that Elizabeth sometimes rode. "Thought you should have your own mount," he explained as he helped Olivia adjust the stirrups to her height. "Willow's steady but responsive. Good horse for learning." Over the next hour, he assessed Olivia's riding skills, limited but not entirely absent, thanks to occasional lessons in Boston, and began teaching her the basics of Western horsemanship. His instruction was patient but exacting, demanding her full attention and best efforts. "In this country, your horse can be the difference between life and death," he explained. "You need to trust each other completely." As the days passed, their evening sessions expanded beyond riding. Hawk taught her to read tracks and signs in the landscape, to identify edible plants and find water in seemingly barren terrain, to navigate by the stars when no other landmarks were visible. He showed her how to move silently through brush, how to use terrain for concealment, and how to listen to the natural sounds of the wilderness for warnings of danger. "Everything out here talks if you know how to listen," he said one evening as they sat quietly in a small grove of aspen trees near the creek. "Birds, insects, the wind in the trees, they all tell stories about what's happening around you." Olivia discovered she was an apt pupil, her keen mind quickly grasping the principles behind his practical lessons. More surprising was how much she enjoyed these skills that would have seemed utterly foreign to her Boston self. There was a primal satisfaction in connecting with the land this way, in developing competencies that had nothing to do with social graces and everything to do with survival. On the fifth evening, Hawk brought a revolver, a Smith, and Wesson with a shortened barrel that fit comfortably in her hand. "Time you learn to shoot," he said simply, leading her to a secluded area where he'd set up targets on fence posts. "Not to make you into a gunfighter, but so you have options if the worst happens." Olivia had never held a firearm before, but she approached the lesson with the same determination she'd brought to everything else. Hawk was, as always, a thorough teacher explaining the mechanics of the weapon, demonstrating proper stance and grip, emphasizing safety above all else. "Remember, it's a tool, not a magic talisman," he cautioned as she prepared to fire her first shot. "Having a gun doesn't make you invincible. Sometimes the smartest move is still to run or hide." Her initial attempts were poor, the recoil surprising her despite Hawk's warnings. But by the end of the session, she was hitting the target with reasonable consistency from 15 paces, not expert marksmanship, but enough to defend herself in an emergency. "Good," Hawk nodded, satisfaction evident in his tone. "Natural aptitude. We'll practice more tomorrow." As they walked back toward the ranch house in the gathering dusk, Olivia realized something had changed in their relationship over these evening sessions. The careful distance Hawk had maintained was gradually diminishing, replaced by a growing ease and mutual respect. He spoke more freely, occasionally offering glimpses into his past, brief anecdotes about tracking for the Army, winters spent with the Shoshone, the mentors who had taught him the skills he now passed on to her. In turn, Olivia shared more of her own story, her childhood in Boston, her father's progressive views on educating daughters, her mother's struggle to maintain the family business after his death, and eventually, the full truth about her stepfather's abuse and embezzlement that had driven her west. "He threatened to have me committed if I exposed him," she explained one evening as they sat by a small campfire, resting after a rigorous tracking exercise. "Said he'd convince everyone I was hysterical, delusional from grief over my mother's death. Could he have done that?" Hawk asked, his expression hardening at the thought. "Possibly," Olivia admitted. "He had influence, connections with doctors who might have cooperated, and women have few legal protections against such things, especially when male relatives claim to be acting in their best interests. So you ran." "I did," she nodded. "With whatever money and jewelry I could gather quickly. I had this notion of reaching San Francisco, finding my mother's sister, starting over where no one knew me." She smiled wryly. "The stagecoach robbery wasn't part of my plan." "Plans have a way of changing out here," Hawk observed, poking at the fire with a stick. "The West doesn't care much for what you intended, only what you do when things go wrong." "Is that what happened to you?" Olivia asked, seizing the opening to learn more about him. "Did your plans change?" Hawk was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the dancing flames. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than usual, reflective. "After the war, I didn't have much in the way of plans." Just knew I couldn't go back to Illinois, to the farm, to pretending the world was the same place it had been. He paused, memories clearly weighing on him. Drifted west with the army for a while, then on my own. Wasn't looking for anything in particular, just space to breathe, I suppose. And did you find it, that space? A faint smile touched his lips. Sometimes, in moments, on nights like this maybe. He glanced up from the fire, meeting her eyes directly. More often lately. The simple admission, heavy with implication, sent warmth spreading through Olivia that had nothing to do with the nearby fire. They sat in companionable silence for a time, the crackling flames and distant night sounds of the ranch creating a peaceful backdrop. "We should head back," Hawk said eventually, rising to his feet and offering her a hand up. "Getting late." As they walked side by side toward the distant lights of the ranch house, Olivia was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the solid reliability of him, the quiet strength that had become her anchor in this new world. Their hands brushed accidentally in the darkness, and neither pulled away immediately, allowing the brief contact to linger a heartbeat longer than necessary. These small moments, a touch, a glance held too long. Words that carried double meanings were accumulating between them, building towards something neither had yet found the courage to name directly. Olivia sensed that Hawk felt it too, this growing connection that transcended their initial roles as rescuer and rescued. Back at the ranch house, they paused on the porch, reluctant as always to end their time together. "Same time tomorrow?" Olivia asked. Though the question had become purely rhetorical, their evening sessions were now an established routine. Hawk nodded, his expression softening in the lamplight spilling from the windows. "You did well today. The shooting especially." "I had a good teacher," she replied, smiling up at him. Something shifted in his gaze, a moment of decision, perhaps, or surrender to what had been building between them. He stepped closer, close enough that Olivia could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool evening air. "Olivia," he began, his voice lower than usual, roughened with emotion he rarely displayed. The porch door opened suddenly, spilling more light into the darkness and revealing Elizabeth McAllister's apologetic face. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, genuine regret in her tone, "but there's news from town. Sheriff Willard has arrived with Marshal Parker." The moment shattered, reality intruding with its usual poor timing. Hawk stepped back, his expression closing once more, though his eyes held Olivia's for a second longer, a promise, perhaps, that what had almost happened was merely postponed, not prevented. "We'll be right in," he told Elizabeth, his voice steady despite the interrupted moment. As they followed Elizabeth into the house, Olivia felt a curious mixture of disappointment and anticipation. Whatever news had brought the lawmen to the ranch so late would undoubtedly impact her situation for better or worse, remained to be seen. But one thing had become increasingly clear in that brief, charged moment on the porch. What was growing between her and Xavier Hawkins was real, mutual, and powerful enough to survive whatever challenges lay ahead. Sheriff Willard and Marshal Parker were waiting in Morgan's study, their expressions grave as they rose to greet Olivia and Hawk. The atmosphere in the room was tense, suggesting the news they brought was significant. "Miss Thornton," Marshal Parker nodded respectfully. "Apologies for the late hour, but developments in town warranted immediate attention." "What's happened?" Hawk asked, his voice calm but alert as he took a position near Olivia, instinctively protective. Marshal Parker exchanged glances with Sheriff Willard before answering. "We've confirmed that Jackson Blackwell and at least 4 of his men were in Prosperity Junction today. They made no attempt to hide their presence, in fact, quite the opposite." They rode openly down the main street, stopped at the Silver Dollar for drinks, asked questions about recent arrivals to the area. "They're looking for me," Olivia stated, a chill running through her despite the warmth of the room. "It appears so," Sheriff Willard confirmed grimly. They were particularly interested in young women traveling alone, and in anyone who might have witnessed the stagecoach robbery near Laramie. "Did they learn anything about Miss Thornton's whereabouts?" Morgan asked, the practical question cutting to the heart of the matter. "Not directly," Marshal Parker replied. "Miss Adelaide was admirably discreet, and we'd cautioned the townspeople against discussing your situation openly. But Blackwell is no fool. He'll have noted your absence from the boarding house, and it wouldn't take much to connect you to the Rocking M, given Hawk's involvement in bringing you to town." Olivia absorbed this sobering assessment, grateful for Hawk's solid presence beside her. "So you believe they'll come here next?" "It's a strong possibility," Marshal Parker acknowledged, "which is why we need to consider our options carefully." "Options?" Elizabeth echoed, concern evident in her voice as she looked at Olivia. The marshal laid out the situation with military precision. "We have three basic choices. First, Miss Thornton could remain here at the ranch with increased security measures. Second, we could attempt to move her to another location, perhaps Cheyenne or Denver, where she would be beyond Blackwell's usual territory. Or third—" He hesitated, glancing at Olivia apologetically. "We could use her presence here to set a trap for Blackwell and his gang." "That's not an option," Hawk stated immediately, his tone brooking no argument. "Using Miss Thornton as bait is out of the question." "I agree," Morgan said firmly. "We don't endanger innocent lives, no matter how desirable the outcome." Marshal Parker raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I understand your concerns, and I'm not suggesting we put Miss Thornton in direct danger. But if Blackwell is coming here regardless, we might as well be prepared to receive him on our terms." "What exactly are you proposing, Marshal?" Olivia asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "A controlled confrontation," he explained. "We position men strategically around the ranch, allow Blackwell to approach thinking he has the element of surprise, then spring our own trap when he's committed himself." "How many men could you provide?" Morgan asked practically. "4 deputies, plus myself and Sheriff Willard," the marshal replied. "Combined with your ranch hands, we'd have a significant numerical advantage." "Blackwell won't come alone," Hawk pointed out. "He typically travels with at least 6 men, sometimes more." "True, but they won't be expecting organized resistance," Marshal Parker countered. "Their usual targets are isolated travelers or small settlements without adequate defense." The discussion continued, weighing the risks and benefits of each approach. Throughout, Olivia listened attentively, grateful that no one suggested excluding her from a conversation that so directly concerned her future. Finally, during a lull in the tactical debate, she spoke up. "I appreciate everyone's concern for my safety, truly. But I believe I should have a say in how we proceed." All eyes turned to her, and she felt Hawk tense slightly beside her, perhaps anticipating what she might say. "I won't run to Denver or Cheyenne," she stated firmly. "That would mean giving up the life I've begun to build here, allowing Blackwell to dictate my future through fear. I won't do that." Morgan nodded approvingly, while Elizabeth's expression showed both concern and respect for her decision. "But I also won't serve as passive bait in a trap," Olivia continued. "If we're going to confront Blackwell, I want to be an active participant in my own defense." She glanced at Hawk, drawing confidence from his presence. "I've been learning skills riding, shooting, awareness of my surroundings. I'm not helpless." "No one suggests you are, Miss Thornton," Marshal Parker assured her. But Blackwell is dangerous, unpredictable. I know exactly how dangerous he is, Olivia interrupted, a rare edge in her voice. I watched him execute the stagecoach driver in cold blood. I've been running from him for weeks. I understand the threat better than anyone. Her words silenced the room. After a moment, Hawk spoke, his voice quiet but carrying absolute conviction. She's right. Miss Thornton has earned the right to determine how we proceed. He looked directly at the marshal. And she's more capable than you might assume. The simple vote of confidence bolstered Olivia's resolve. I propose we combine elements of your suggestions, Marshal. I'll remain here at the ranch, but with enhanced security measures as you outlined. If Blackwell comes, we'll be prepared to defend against him not as an ambush, but as a legitimate response to his aggression. Marshal Parker considered her words thoughtfully. A reasonable compromise, he acknowledged. But it would require significant preparation, and every man on the property would need to understand his role precisely. Morgan runs a tight operation, Sheriff Willard observed. His hands are loyal and disciplined. With proper coordination, it could work. Morgan stood, decision apparently made. Then that's how we'll proceed. Marshal, if you and the sheriff can remain tonight, we'll develop a comprehensive security plan. Elizabeth, perhaps you could show Miss Thornton. I'd like to stay, Olivia interjected calmly. If I'm to be part of this, I should understand the full strategy. A hint of a smile touched Morgan's weathered face. Of course. Take a seat then. This may be a long night. The next several hours were devoted to detailed planning. Maps of the ranch were spread across Morgan's desk, with each approach route analyzed for vulnerability and defensive potential. The marshal, drawing on his military experience, suggested positioning men in pairs at strategic points, establishing clear lines of sight and communication protocols. Hawk's intimate knowledge of the surrounding terrain proved invaluable, as he identified likely approaches Blackwell might favor and potential blind spots in their defenses. Throughout the discussion, he remained close to Olivia, occasionally explaining technical aspects of the plan in quiet asides that both educated and reassured her. It was well past midnight when they finally concluded, a comprehensive strategy in place. Marshal Parker would return to town the following day to gather his deputies, while Sheriff Willard would remain at the ranch to begin implementing the security measures they'd outlined. As the meeting broke up, Olivia found herself exhausted yet oddly exhilarated. For the first time since the stagecoach robbery, she felt not like a victim or a fugitive, but like an active participant in determining her own fate. Elizabeth insisted on providing coffee and sandwiches before everyone retired, leading them to the kitchen where the late supper had been prepared. As the others engaged in conversation over the simple meal, Hawk drew Olivia slightly aside. "You all right?" he asked quietly, his eyes searching hers with genuine concern. "Yes," she replied honestly. "Better than I expected to be, given the circumstances." He nodded, studying her face in the lamplight. "You did well in there. Stood your ground, made your case clearly." A hint of pride colored his voice. Not everyone would have handled it with such composure. "I've had a good teacher these past days," Olivia said, holding his gaze meaningfully. "In more ways than one." Something flickered in Hawk's eyes, an acknowledgement of what had been interrupted earlier on the porch, perhaps, or a deeper recognition of how their relationship had evolved beyond its initial parameters. "Olivia," he began, his voice lowered for her ears alone. "About earlier, Mr. Hawkins," Marshal Parker called from across the kitchen. "A word about the South Ridge approach, if you have a moment." The interruption drew a barely perceptible sigh from Hawk. "We'll talk tomorrow," he promised Olivia, his eyes conveying what words couldn't in their public setting. "During our usual session, if that's still possible with all this." "I'll be ready at sundown," she confirmed, appreciating his commitment to continuing her training despite the new complications. A brief smile touched his lips, one of those rare, transformative expressions that revealed the man beneath the taciturn exterior. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be busy for everyone." With that, he rejoined the tactical discussion, leaving Olivia to reflect on the curious turns her life had taken. A month ago, she had been fleeing Boston in disgrace, her future uncertain and her confidence shaken by her stepfather's betrayal. Now she stood in a Wyoming ranch kitchen, an active participant in a plan to confront one of the territory's most notorious outlaws, drawing strength from the growing connection with a man whose quiet integrity and unwavering support had become essential to her newfound resilience. As she finally climbed the stairs to her room, exhaustion beginning to claim her, Olivia realized that despite the danger looming on the horizon, she felt something unexpected. A sense of belonging, of purpose, of having found against all odds a place and people worth fighting for. And central to that feeling was Xavier Hawkins, the cowboy who had once built a fire by a stream and waited for her to wake, unknowingly changing both their lives in ways neither could have anticipated. The following days passed in a blur of activity as the ranch transformed into a carefully organized defensive position. Ranch hands were paired and assigned specific sectors to patrol, with clear instructions on communication and response protocols. Marshal Parker returned from town with 4 deputies, each experienced in frontier law enforcement and armed accordingly. Throughout the preparations, Olivia continued her daily routine, helping Elizabeth with household tasks during the day and meeting Hawk for their evening training sessions as promised. These moments together took on new significance in light of the looming confrontation with Blackwell, each lesson potentially critical to her survival. "Remember," Hawk emphasized as they practiced with the revolver, "aim for center mass, the largest target. Don't try for fancy shots like in dime novels." Olivia nodded, focusing on the makeshift target he'd established. Her accuracy had improved considerably over their sessions, but they both knew that firing at an inanimate object was vastly different from confronting an armed adversary. "I hope I won't need to use this," she admitted, lowering the weapon after emptying the cylinder. "So do I," Hawk agreed, his expression serious. "But hoping isn't the same as preparing. Out here, it's better to have skills you never use than to need skills you never learned." As they walked back toward the ranch house after their session, the setting sun painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber, Hawk seemed unusually pensive. They had fallen into a comfortable pattern of conversation during these walks, but today he was quieter than usual, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. "What is it?" Olivia finally asked, touching his arm lightly to draw his attention. Hawk hesitated, then stopped walking, turning to face her directly. In the fading light, his features were cast in shadow, but his eyes remained fixed on hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I've been thinking about what happens after," he said quietly. "After Blackwell," Olivia clarified, though she suspected his thoughts ran deeper. Hawk nodded. "If all goes according to plan, the threat will be eliminated. You'll be free to return to town, take up the teaching position, build the life you came west to find." Something in his tone, a careful neutrality that didn't quite mask an underlying emotion, alerted Olivia to the real question beneath his words. "And where would you be in this scenario?" she asked directly. A fleeting smile touched his lips at her characteristic forthrightness. "Where I've always been, I suppose. Here at the ranch or tracking or wherever Morgan needs me." "I see," Olivia said softly, her heart beating faster as they approached the conversation they'd been circling for days. "And is that what you want? For things to return to how they were before?" The question hung between them in the gathering dusk, weighted with implications neither had fully articulated until now. Hawk took a step closer, close enough that she could see the interplay of emotions across his usually guarded features: uncertainty, hope, a vulnerability that he rarely allowed others to witness. "No," he said finally, the single word carrying the weight of a much longer confession. "That's not what I want." Olivia's breath caught at the simple honesty of his admission. "What do you want, Xavier?" she asked, using his given name deliberately, bridging the last remaining formality between them. For a moment he seemed at a loss for words, this man of action struggling to express feelings he'd perhaps never expected to confront. Then, with characteristic directness, he reached out, his calloused hand gently cupping her cheek. "You," he said simply. "I want you in my life, Olivia Thornton. In whatever way you'll have me." The declaration, so plain and yet so profound, sent warmth spreading through her like sunrise after a long night. Without hesitation, Olivia placed her hand over his where it rested against her face. "I want that too," she whispered, the admission both frightening and exhilarating in its honesty. "I have for longer than I care to admit." Something transformed in Hawk's expression, a lightening, as if a burden he'd carried for years had suddenly been lifted. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down toward her. Their first kiss was gentle, almost tentative, a question asked and answered in the meeting of lips. But as Olivia's arms wound around his neck, drawing him closer, the kiss deepened, years of solitude and longing giving way to a connection that felt both new and somehow inevitable, as if they had been moving toward this moment since he first found her by the stream. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Hawk rested his forehead against hers, his arms still circling her waist in a protective embrace. "I'm not a man of fancy words," he said quietly. "Never have been. But what I feel for you, it's like nothing I've known before." "We don't need fancy words," Olivia assured him, her heart full to bursting with emotions too complex for simple language. "Just honesty. And you've never given me anything less." He smiled then, one of those rare, transformative expressions that revealed the man beneath the weathered exterior. "Honesty, then. I'm falling in love with you, Olivia Thornton. May have started that first day by the stream for all I know." The declaration, delivered with such straightforward sincerity, made Olivia's heart soar. "I think I've been falling for you too, Xavier Hawkins," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You were my anchor when everything felt lost, and in this wild, unpredictable world, you give me a sense of safety and belonging I've never known before." They stood together, wrapped in the warmth of the evening, their connection deepening in the shared vulnerability of their truths. For the first time since her flight from Boston, Olivia felt a glimmer of hope, not just for her own future, but for a shared journey with the man who had become her protector, her confidant, and perhaps the love she had always dreamed of finding.